So today's topic, stop asking for permission and validation, walk your own path. Insights are gained through visceral experience. So something that I've thought about recently and from time to time is how we make decisions, right? Decision making is critical in life, especially as you get older. You realize the implications and the consequences on your decisions that you make after being presented a variety of choices. And these decisions can have lasting impact for years. Some are 1 year decisions, like when you sign a lease to an apartment. Others can be 4 to 5 year decisions when you decide to relocate to another city, right? Especially if you're moving more than just yourself. You're moving you and a partner plus a pet, or you and a family. So these are things that we ought to not take so lightly and consider and weigh all of our options. And so I wanted to touch on that today, on the notion that you don't need to seek permission. And what I find that the majority of us are susceptible to, including myself, is we tend to seek these how-tos. Like, how do we do this? Or the shoulds. Should I do this? Should you do that? Or on the reverse side, telling someone you should do this, you shouldn't do that, right? There are no shoulds. And speaking along the lines of Dr. Kapil Gupta, who is someone who's heavily involved with high professional athletes, celebrities, just high performance individuals in society, kings, queens, people that you see on the upper echelon of, if you want to call it, success in terms of social capital or financial capital throughout the world. Dr. Kapil Gupta touches on this idea of there are no how-tos, which I think is a powerful thing to understand, that there is no instruction manual for you, the individual in life, with your uniqueness, your unique DNA, you're one of one, right? When we come into this world, we have our own unique DNA strands, our own script to write, and our own script to live out. So many times we try to ask other people how we should do something, and the reality is that we're limited, when we do that to ourselves. And those people providing such words are limited in their understanding as well, right? Now, let me delineate though. There's two main things, right? There's the mechanical how-tos versus the creative kind of how-tos, if you want to look at it from that standpoint, right? If you work for a job, whether you're in construction or whether you're working in an office as a knowledge worker on your laptop, sure, there's a mechanical approach towards things. We call these standard operating procedures. You're an electrician. How do you install this, you know, item into the socket? These are things that um, are appropriate. These are how-tos that are appropriate, right? The mechanical. But when it comes to things that are creative, no one can truly craft a game plan, a playbook for you. They can give you advice, right, on the mechanical side, but how you get there through your random, injection of efforts is dependent on your own creativity, and your efforts towards that progress of your goals or your desired outcome that you're hoping to achieve, right? When it comes to Michael Jordan, right? Even if Michael Jordan tried to recreate himself, he tries to tell you, or Stephen Curry, or LeBron James, right? These high sports performance athletes, they can kind of give you an idea on some mechanical things, but in terms of all of the culmination of activities that led them towards their success, this is something that doesn't come easy, right? Someone can give you a kind of some of the mechanical things, like how to shoot the ball, how to jump, how to play defense. However, putting that all together in its highest form of expression, in its most artistic display of talent, is going to be unique to that individual. And that's something that comes with practice, which is aligned with the mechanical aspect. But then on the creative side, that comes from you. And that's your total experience, your lived physical, psychological, emotional, the total amalgamation of all of that together that creates who you are in accordance with your unique DNA and your unique talents and what you have to offer in this world, right? And so that's why, going back to the theme of this chat, which is there are no how-tos. You do not need to ask for permission whether to pursue some type of career, some type of business, some type of sports endeavor, some type of goal, because no one can truly create that for you. People can tell you things, they can tell you shoulds, you should try this, you should try that, but these are just mere projections based off of that individual's anecdotal or limited experiences. Now, that's not to say that that person may be more heavily knowledgeable in that space, and it's not to say that they can assist with providing certain tools or mental models or frameworks to approach some challenge before you to get towards some ultimate solution. But to ask a Michael Jordan to recreate themselves, even him would have a challenge of trying to replicate his own success, right? You need all the right things to add up at the right time, the right place, in the moment in which you execute that thing, right? And in order to even get there, there's all this groundwork that had to happen way before you got there. And then You have to merge that with talent and just overall experience and luck in terms of timing of opportunity to be in a specific type of role and to be around specific types of people that can help garner that success that you're seeking, right? So the bottom line is that each individual must proceed once they have, and even that in itself is kind of a how-to, but what I want to say is, if there's something that is calling you, is pulling the strings of your heart, that's worth reflecting on. It's worth considering pursuing. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't be the top of your mind. And it's good to kind of reflect on it from a ikigai standpoint, which is, hey, what am I good at? That comes naturally. What does the world need? And who is willing to pay me for this, for the skill set, for this talent, for my experiences, right? So whenever it comes to these critical decisions on life, on whether we should proceed with some type of endeavor or not to proceed, sure, we can ask our friends, family, and even colleagues on inputs, but ultimately, truth and wisdom is typically obtained through these visceral experiences. It's once you decide to jump in to something and embrace the unknown, allowing yourself to navigate through the ambiguity, to navigate through random hiccups and challenges along that path. That's how you'll know from a visceral standpoint whether something is helping you to trend towards your calling or your passion, if you want to call it that, and whether it's not. And it's through those kind of gut experiences and, and those sensations within that experience, whether there's a feeling of euphoria or angst and pain, whether this is something worth continuing through. And it doesn't just apply to career decisions. This can apply to relationships with people, right? Whether intimate relationships or just business relationships or friendships. It can apply to deciding whether we should or shouldn't move to a certain city or state or another country. Also, home-wise, should I not buy a home? Should I continue to rent? Right? We can get advice from friends and family, but at the end of the day, everyone will be providing some type of prescription, and it's based off their anecdotal experiences, right? Regardless, unless they're someone super in tune with that particular space and as like a day job, and they have certain data and statistics, even then it's still based off of another individual's perception, based off the data they have, whether it's a large data set or whether it's a minimal amount of data provided. Certain things you have to live through to really see if that thing does work for you. You might make a home purchase and realize, actually, after being a couple years into it, that it wasn't all that you thought it was. all of the hype didn't match up with your expectations. On the flip side, you might find out that it is for you, that this was the thing you wanted all along. The White House, the big house and the white picket fence was truly something that matched your lifestyle and your future plans. And so many choices will be offered throughout life, but being able to discern with clarity which choice is most appropriate for you at that particular stage in life is something that you have to figure out for yourself. Right? So I don't want to dismiss the idea that advice or prescriptions aren't useful or aren't helpful, but when it truly comes to seeking truth for oneself, that's a journey that has to be lived through, right? Because prescriptions are thrown at us all day. We're always seeking these how-tos. You go to the doctor, you get all these prescriptions. For a moment, they might solve some pain, but the experience is ephemeral, short-lived. What we truly want are cures, right? It's a one-time dose and you're done. You never deal with that pain ever again. And in life, it's rare that you can receive a cure in terms of advice from another individual. 99% of the time, what we're receiving is prescriptions, how-tos. You should do this, you should do that. But there are no shoulds. In the words of Dr. Kapil Gupta, there are no shoulds. What works for one person may not work for you. And sometimes some of what works for someone, yeah, it's possible that it could work for you. But the truth is, at the end of the day, if you're finding yourself having to repeat the same type of processes over and over in terms of seeking advice for particular problems, then what you've experienced is more and more prescriptions, right? It means that whatever coaching, whatever therapy, whatever instruction, school instruction, advice, from friends and family, if those particular things that were communicated to you, those prescriptions did not solve a particular problem, or the overarching, or if it didn't allow you to reach your desired goal, which is truly where you're trying to get to, if it didn't cure it, then yes, it's a reminder that you've bought into the prescriptions, into the how-tos, and it didn't really solve your problem, which is why you keep finding yourself back at that drawing board. Right? Again, this doesn't mean that you're not going to iterate along the way and find ways to improve, but whenever you find this recurring theme of having to keep seeking ad hoc through piecemeal bits and pieces of information or advice here and there, this coach, that coach, this influencer, that influencer, right? we do that with business all the time, right? Finances, all these financial gurus on social media, Instagram, YouTube. We're trying to gather all this information left and right, but what you end up finding is all these prescriptions, and what you see is how this person became a millionaire or billionaire isn't necessarily a one size fits all for how this other person became one, right? It doesn't matter how they got there. It doesn't make one better than the other, or one right and the other wrong, or one good or the other bad. You realize quickly that there are multiple paths, and those individuals found the cure that works for themselves, right? But I think what is good to glean from those is understanding on fundamentals. How do I establish a solid baseline in terms of financial planning fundamentals, right? Work, save some, invest, right? Those fundamental things, those mechanical. But how you start to grow your money exponentially, which involves a little risk taking, and which involves, depending on your personal goals and how you define what success is to you in terms of finance, because it will vary from individual to individual. One person might think they need to become a billionaire to be considered successful, and whereas another might just think, hey, as long as they can make $500,000, no debts, and live off of 4% interest every year, meaning live below their means in a fashion that allows them to be able to afford all their bills in total, to them, they're living their rich life. And so that's why when you ask someone, hey, how did you do this? How do you get that? How do you get that Ferrari? Yeah, sure, they can give you some anecdotal storyline, but for you to want to be like that person, you wouldn't just be inheriting or assuming one side or one piece of their story. You would have to recreate their entire lived experience, right? And sometimes we forget that how that person got to that place, there was all these trials and tribulations and hurdles that they had to navigate through within their life, and it's just not going to play out so similarly. But it's just something to be mindful of, to be cognizant of, in terms of when we seek advice, when we're seeking these prescriptions, right? Because the majority of us are susceptible to that. We're always looking for these how-tos. How do I do this? Should I do this? Should I do that? And it doesn't make it a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. And once you can understand that, you can at least understand how certain types of information may or may not be helpful. And when you don't get the result that you like, at least you're clear on why that might be. That someone wrote a prescription, but it wasn't supposed to be for you. It was supposed to be for another patient. Right? So with that said, one of the best things you can do is just take action. And usually the impetus towards taking action, that kind of critical moment in your life, whether it's through trauma experienced, that tipping point, in moments like that, that can be make or break. And usually what you see is it's when people almost fall to the bottom that's when it invokes change and gets that person to get up and make a difference. And sometimes that's what we have to do, right? We can't wait and act on other people. We can't, in terms of asking for permission, we can't wait and ask and get permission as to whether we should or shouldn't do something. It's in our best interest to have this bias for action, just this natural inclination to just proceed, especially when we have that gut feeling, which is essentially the culmination of all of our experiences heuristically telling us, hey, take action, right? That's why we feel that jolt, that push. It's you know, it's our gut feeling. It's the neurons firing off. It's all that acid buildup in your gut. It's, you know, it could be your spirit, your soul, whatever you believe in, right? But we have those moments because there's something innately within our DNA that's pulling us towards that. You know, it's our heart's desire towards that thing. And if you're going to trust anything or anyone, that's probably when trust should be, or showcased. That's when it should show up, right? Is when it comes to trusting ourselves. Because at the end of the day, at least, even if something didn't work out for you, at least you were able to operate on your own accord towards your own goals and not live out other people's desires, right? You only have one, at least physical human body and life that we're confidently aware of. In terms of what happens when our body dies off, no one truly knows for certain. We only know through faith and assumptions. But one thing for certain is you get this one body. And so what you don't want is others to dictate how that is manifested in this world. You want to be able to write your own script. You don't want to be an extra in someone else's movie or television show. And the purest way, or one of the purest ways to do that, is by not asking for permission, not asking for shoulds. Should I do this? Should I do that? As I mentioned before, it's in your best interest to lean on experts in a certain area for the mechanical things. But in terms of being creative, it's rare that someone could show you how to be creative, right? Mozart, when he made his music, his teacher didn't teach him that. His teacher or instructor, or whoever he was under, his mentor, could probably provide mechanics and certain fundamentals and refinement on that. But in terms of putting all of these varied ideas together to combust and create this new explosion of music on paper, that's from him. That's a combination of DNA, talent, visceral experiences from living in the world, from living through relationships, dealing with the good and bad of this world. That's how you create that magic. And that's creativity. There are no playbooks or how-tos on creativity. Creativity is a very organic and innately driven activity. And for that to happen, yeah, it can come through a combination of collaboration as well as solitude. You know, an individual working on that goal within their own personal space. But it takes that experience in the solitude to be able to bring the novelty of ideas in that and bring it to the bigger collaborative group that helps generate these new ideas, that helps create things at places like Google with AI, DeepMind, right? The chat GPTs. It took people going off to their individual hidden layers in their caves and then emerging out, bringing those unique individual experiences and coming together collaboratively. So yes, creativity can emerge from not just the individual experience, but also collaborative, but it takes the individual to go out and seek that for themselves before that can happen. In the same way, when we say, hey, how do we change the world? Well, the world is the total aggregate of each human being in terms of, if we're speaking to changing the behaviors of individuals, and it requires each individual to adjust their behaviors that are towards a more civil society, or at least perceived as more favorable behaviors and attitudes. And then once they show up like that individually within the group, within society, now society from a total aggregate standpoint will be, or at least reflect, a more civilized state of existence. But in order to achieve that level of civility, it requires each individual to go off on their own, basically fix themselves, then come back to the group and offer up themselves, add their value, so that the total value is a desired outcome. So to end this, as you continue to make critical decisions in your life, career decisions, whether to stay at one job or to leave, relationship decisions, whether to pursue this relationship with this individual or not, whether to purchase a home or continue to rent, whether to live in a particular city or to leave. All of these major decisions ought to be made based off your own reflection, holding the mirror up to yourself and saying, hey, based off of where I'm at now and the journey it took to get here and my individual aspirations, what makes sense going forward within specific time spans, right? What serves me best over the next 3 to 5 years? Okay, now what does the next decade look like? And then after that, what does the rest of my life? How do I start to walk in the right path for me? And I think once you start to explore that, you'll start to gain better understanding as to what makes the most sense for you going forward. Because at the end of the day, if you keep asking for prescriptions, how-tos, for permission from friends, family, coworkers, you're just going to get a variety of responses based off of limited anecdotal experiences that might not be most appropriate for you, right? So nothing wrong to glean and gain understanding from hearing those thoughts and ideas, but you're best served with self-examination and truly reflecting on the life you've lived, the life you're continuing to live, and where you seek to go in the future with your life. I think through that observation, that will help best inform your next major decision when it comes to gathering permission on whether or not to proceed in the next endeavor. Anyhow, take care, ladies and gentlemen. Speak to you soon.